Hey, third grade, just wanted to give you some extra information about how you're going to test your reading grit today. And just to remind you that you all are definitely good readers, but in order to become a great reader, you have to develop some reading grit. And we have to collect some information to decide what your level of grit is now and how to get even more of it, right? So, we're going to take this reading grit test, and this isn't a test where you get like a grade or a satisfactory. It's a test for you to develop some goals that you have for your reading grit. So I wanted to, like all goals, we collect some data to determine what our goals should be, and then we continue collecting that data, right? And so I want you all to take that reading grit test today. And then in a little bit, I want you to take the reading grit test again. And I want to see if some of your reading grit has increased. And that's going to tell us whether or not you are practicing some of the strategies that I'm going to talk about in your goals when we get to the bottom of this. So our goal is obviously today's reading grit to be lower than our reading grit the next time we take this, right? Because we're always trying to improve. We want to go from being a good reader to a great reader. So what you're going to do is the first thing is to get a piece of paper and write 1 to 10 down it because this is where you're going to be recording the point values, okay? And this is also something that our reading teacher talks about in the video that you just watched too. So that should sound familiar. Then it says on this document that for each question you need to note the point value. So I know how to note it on here. I'm just going to write it, but I can't write anything when I'm on my Google Docs. So I'm going to give you some recommendations and you can choose one. And that one recommendation is going to be whatever's easiest for you. Remember, you may choose one. Otherwise, you're just wasting your grit time messing around with the different functions that you can use on your Google Doc. So here we go. I'm going to read the first sentence, and then I'm going to decide which of the answers below matches a description of who I am when it comes to my reading. I read almost every day in school and home. Somewhat. I mean, you all saw my reading log. I skipped a couple days in between. So I think that for me personally, this somewhat like me is what describes me the most. So here's one, and probably the easiest way to note on here what your reading grit is for this answer today. You can click your mouse and put it right there in front of the answer that you want. You can come up here and add a little bullet point for you. Great. Now it's very obvious that that is the one that I selected. Or you can select the whole answer and come up to the U for underline and underline it. Now, that's very obvious that that's the one I've chosen. Or you can decide that you want to select the whole thing and highlight it. All right, now that's very obvious that that's my answer. Once you've chosen either to bullet point it, underline it, or highlight, then you're going to look at what the number is. Oh, it's a 1. So next to my number 1, I need to write 1 for 1 point so far. Then I'm going to go to number 2 and repeat it. I'm going to read it, see if it describes me very much, somewhat, or not like me. Choose which of the ways I'm going to note it on here, and then record it on my notepad as well. If you accidentally do something that you didn't mean to on this document, there is a little backwards button. Oops, I didn't mean that I somewhat do that. Oops, I didn't mean to erase that question. Oops, I didn't mean to type all those letters in there. You just click the backwards arrow and it undoes what you previously did. Lots of my friends already know about that. Then, when you get down to the bottom, there are 10 questions. You need to look at your notepad and add up all 10 of these numbers right here. Use those great math strategies that Mr. Dotson and Mrs. Hennis have taught you and Ms. Schweik, to find your total, find your sum. And you're going to take your little mouse, click it in there, and type in your total. Then, you're going to use that total to figure out, well, what is my grit right now in reading? Once you figure out what your grit is, then you can start to develop a plan for how you're going to get more of it. So if you have maybe 0 to 4 as your sum, that means exactly what it says there. You need some grit. So basically that says that you probably are choosing goals that are way too easy and you're not having any moments of frustration, and so you're never achieving the best that you can be. It also might mean that your goals are way too hard. Wise goals are similar to choosing a just right book. They need to be something that is a little difficult for us, but still something that we can get to. If I get in the range of 5 to 8, that means I have a little bit, but I'm not really persevering very much. So that might mean that I am only reading the Read to Me books on Epic, or that I always ask mom and dad to help me with a word instead of trying it on my own. And those are things that need to change if I want to go from being a good reader to a great reader. Or maybe I got in the 9 to 12 range, which means I have some grit. I'm having some moments of frustration that I work through. I'm also having some moments of frustration that I totally give up on. So it might mean that I'm reading a couple of pages and I've gotten to my third hard word and I say, forget it, and I get rid of the book. Well, 3 hard words means I have some grit because I worked through those. But by the third one, you should not be just giving up on that entire book. Maybe your goal is that when you get to this point right here, you're only going to ask mom and dad for help when you get to the 6th word that's difficult for you. Or maybe instead of reading the Read to Me books 5 times a week, maybe you're only going to read them once a week. So you're going to use wherever you end up right here to reflect and think, what does this score on my test, what does it tell me about as a reader? Does it tell me that I really am not persevering and working through my reading at all? Therefore, my strategies haven't gotten any practice. Therefore, I'm not getting any better. Or does it tell me that I have some grit, but maybe I need to push myself just a little bit harder? Maybe I need to read just one less Read to Me book on Epic. Maybe I need to read just one more hard word before I ask for help. And that is where you'll start developing your goal down here. Once you say, oh, I have a little bit of grit, but not a lot. What can I do to help myself reach my goals? These are all the examples I talked about earlier. Read less Read to Me books on Epic. Read harder words before I ask help from mom and dad. Build up my reading stamina so that I am getting some words that are a little bit more frustrating. We've already set goals more than one day in reading. We had a short-term day, we've had a long-term day, then we wrote down our long-term day. So now it's time for you to ask yourself, what can I do to reach these goals? And those are probably going to be related to how you can create more grit when it comes to your reading. So once you take the quiz, note the quiz, add up your results, do your reflecting, then you take your mouse and start typing in your answers. What did I notice about myself as a reader? Well, I noticed that I have some grit, but I can always increase my grit. How can I help myself to better reach my goals? I'm going to increase my reading stamina and stop asking mom and dad for help with unknown words. Then go back to It's Learning and make sure you hit submit so that your teachers can see the results of your reading grit test. Happy reading! Oh, you thought I was done, but I'm not. I wanted to remind you that as you're thinking about your reading grit, I want you to go directly into your independent reading time from this assignment with a ton of reading energy to try as best you can. You are going to persevere through a difficult moment in your independent reading time today. And if you don't have a difficult moment, you probably need to be asking yourself, is this a book that's too easy for me? And if so, that is not going to build up your reading grit. So it's time for you to shelve that too easy book and get one that's just right. You're going to have some frustrating moments, you're going to power through them, and then you're going to end up super proud of yourself with a little bit more grit today than you had yesterday. All right, now I'm officially done.